There is so much going on. Let's get to it, shall we? By the way, Nashville's Morning News brought to you by Tennessee National Golf and Waterfront Community, TennesseeNational.com. So there's a lot of headlines that I'm going to throw out at you, and then I'm going to play some audio and so forth. But one of the questions is, has America hit a nuclear facility in Iran? It is the Natanz nuclear facility. It is the core of Iran's nuclear program. I got some details on that in a minute. But, this particular facility is where they do their nuclear enrichment and where they also come up with, nuclear energy just to keep the lights on and so forth. But, the question is always going to be asked, what exactly is Iran doing at these various nuclear facilities? So we'll get into that. Also, Israel is bombing the living crap out of Beirut because Hezbollah is doing what Hezbollah does, attacking Israel. So that is a good thing. Israel is responding. President Trump says a big wave is yet to come. That is what he told CNN last night in a phone call. Iran is launching new strikes against our allies in the Gulf. The bombing does continue. The president and his allies have been out in force talking about the justification for this attack. So I want to play a few audio bites from not only Donald Trump supporters, but also from the vice president, J.D. Vance. So first, let's listen to Markwayne Mullin. I think part of what's going on with all of this, all of these, J.D. Vance and Markwayne Mullin and some of these other folks going on the TV and doing all the shows is because President Trump has seen the polling. I talked about this yesterday. President Trump has seen the polling that shows that the American people, by and large, if you believe the polling, are not on board with what has been going on. This is Markwayne Mullin, and he was talking about the justifications for the attack.
Since 1979, the Ayatollah had talked about becoming a nuclear nation. Since November of 1979, they've been attacking the United States or directly or through their proxies all the way up until June of 2025. And so they were never going to stop with this fetish or this dream that they had of becoming the utopia for the Muslim powerhouse. The truth is the only way this was going to change, the Ayatollah had to be removed. Now, President Trump tried multiple times to let diplomacy work. He made it very clear during the 12-day war that we know where you're at. If we wanted to take you out, we would. Just don't rebuild your nuclear sites. All they had to do is not build it. But he couldn't help himself. He was getting later in age, and this is something he said he was going to do. And so he pushed forward, and the president doesn't bluff. He's not going to bluff. He may not do it exactly when you think he's going to do it. He'll do it on his time. But if he says he's going to do something, he will follow through with it, and he's proven it time and time again.
Yeah, and you heard the president yesterday live here on WTN, actually, during Chris's show, talking about all of this and really making the case.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's number one sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
Makes a lot of sense. By the way, somebody started arguing with me yesterday. I touched on this very briefly in the 5 o'clock hour about oil. Somebody saying, no blood for oil and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that was brought up yesterday was the China factor in all of this, because if we attack Iran and their ability to produce oil is diminished, well, guess where China, our mortal enemy, gets a lot of their oil? It's like 25%. They get that from Iran. So between Venezuela, Iran, remember when we took over the ghost ships? That was a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now. But we took over those ghost ships. Well, those ghost ships, some of them were apparently headed to ultimately China. So okay, I'm not going to say, that this is all for the oil. It's not, because we know exactly a number of different things can be true. We can be going after Iran because of the fact that they were trying to rebuild their nuclear facilities yet again. But part of that can also impact China and their oil, and the oil that China was buying from Iran and buying from, Venezuela as well. So if our attacking Iran to keep them from getting a nuclear weapon, building a nuclear weapon, adversely impacts China's ability to buy oil from Iran, and it weakens China, okay. I mean, a number of different things can be true. We can diminish our mortal enemy's economy by, cutting off their oil supply from Iran. If that happens to be a byproduct of what we're doing, okay. And by the way, you know what Iran has done? They're closing the Strait of Hormuz. So that also impacts oil. There's a reason why, and I think I heard Joan say earlier, oil prices are going up this morning. So part of all of this has been that the president has been out there trying to make the case. This was something where it was sort of a preventative measure. We don't want Iran to be able to have that nuclear weapon. And so there's a lot of people that are not on board with what we did because we weren't actually attacked, like, for example, on 9/11. But I want you to think about this. Let's say that we could have taken out, for whatever reason, we could have prevented what happened on 9/11 of 2001. And we could have prevented it a week prior by attacking somebody somewhere. Well, the American people also wouldn't have been for that because why? Well, because we weren't attacked first. The American people, by and large, they are for or willing to accept us, going after somebody that gives us a black eye. But if we see somebody who we believe is about to come after us and we do something to prevent that from happening, the American people, they're not as quick to get on board with that kind of attack. So Vice President J.D. Vance, he was on Fox News. This was last night.
If you think back to Afghanistan, 20 years of mission creep, 20 years of not having a clear objective, and 20 years of the United States trying to bring liberal democracy to Afghanistan. Iraq was a little bit shorter, but we were still in that country for nearly a decade with no clear mission, no clear definition. What's so different about this is that the president has clearly defined what he wants to accomplish. And there's just no way, I said this before the conflict started, I'll repeat it again, there's just no way that Donald Trump is going to allow this country to get into a multi-year conflict with no clear end in sight and no clear objective. What is different about President Trump, and it's frankly different about both Republicans and Democrats of the past, is that he's not going to let his country go to war unless there's a clearly defined objective. He's defined that objective as Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and has to commit long term to never trying to rebuild their nuclear capability. It's pretty clear. It's pretty simple. And I think that means that we're not going to get into the problems that we've had with Iraq and Afghanistan.
So one of the things that the president said yesterday was he was planning on 4 weeks, but also said, well, we could be there for as long as it takes, which could be 2 weeks, could be 3 weeks, it could be 5 weeks. You heard J.D. Vance talk about mission creep. I mean, we've seen that happen where the mission just, continues to creep along and, things change and we didn't want to do ground troops, but then we had to do ground troops. And so the best laid plans can somehow, some way, for some reason, end up becoming far different. And so that is what the worry is with this military action in Iran. I don't really see us being there for years. I don't. I think the ferocity and the effectiveness of our strikes is pretty clear. To be honest, we've sunk their entire Navy. We've further destroyed their ballistic missile program. We've taken out their military and communication sites. Runways for airplanes as well. Again, we took out their supreme leader, dozens of his allies as well. Overnight, the president did post something that I want to talk about. So what did the president post last night? Overnight, the president posting that we have a virtually unlimited supply of weapons and we can bombard Iran for as long as we want. The exact quote, wars can be fought forever and very successfully using just these supplies, talking about missiles and bombs and so forth. And so this comes after the Iranians attacked our U.S. embassy in Saudi Arabia. We have now, again, as I mentioned, a total of 6 Americans that have died in battle. The other thing that the president has said is that this does seem to be somewhat of a pivot in that regime change is not what the president is demanding. It would be nice, but the objective is no more nuclear aspirations. This is what J.D. Vance said about that.
You know, in a perfect world, yeah, we would love it if somebody came to power in Iran who was willing to work with the United States, who was willing to show some respect to the United States, and again, most importantly, made that long-term commitment that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. But ultimately, whatever happens with the regime in one form or another, it's incidental to the president's primary objective here, which is to make sure the Iranian terrorist regime does not build a nuclear bomb. So, you know, there are a lot of things that could happen with the regime. Obviously, the president and I would prefer that you have a friendly regime in Iran, a stable country, a country that's willing to work with the United States as opposed to, you know, bomb our soldiers and try to build a nuclear weapon. But fundamentally, so long as we achieve the president's objective to make it clear that Iran can't build the bomb, I think the president will be happy with the outcome.
By the way, in the news today, Donald Trump telling the New York Post in an interview that was published, I think it was last night, that he would be agreeable to boots on the ground. He said that he would not rule out sending U.S. ground troops into Iran if they were necessary, adding that unlike past presidents, he does not promise there will be no boots on the ground. And so that is a part of the conversation this morning that has a lot of people, of course, as you can imagine, hyperventilating. But there is no doubt that the president has tried diplomacy. He tried and he tried. He doesn't want to do this. You know, one of the things that I know that I've said, and probably other people have said as well, I know that Chris said it, is that if there's any president, and I bet you'd agree with this, Joan, if there's any president that I would trust with this kind of a war, it is Donald Trump, because he's the guy that has said that he does not like war. He hates war. He hates people dying for, you know, essentially no real reason whatsoever except a couple of warring countries. That's why I believe that I trust Donald Trump with this far more than I would trust others. And so this is a man who has ended many, many wars and conflicts across the world. And I truly believe that this is a man who hates war. So I understand when he says that I'm going to do whatever it takes to end this quickly. That is the point that Donald Trump is trying to make. Now, here's the other thing. I think it is great that we are committed to this concept of no nukes for Iran. We all know that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. It is something that the president has been saying for a long time. I do trust that President Trump has no interest in being in Iran for decades. He hated what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. As far as all of that diplomacy goes, this is what J.D. Vance had to say about that.
Not just that they're trying to enrich, and this is one of the almost comical elements of the diplomacy that we've been engaged in for the past month, the past year, I should say. You know, Steve Witkoff, Marco Rubio, Jared Kushner, they did such a good job, such a deliberate job. But the Iranians would come back to us, Jesse, and they'd say, well, you know, having enrichment for civilian purposes, for energy purposes, is a matter of national pride. And so we would say, okay, that's interesting, but why are you building your enrichment facilities 70 feet underground? And why are you enriching to a level that's way beyond civilian enrichment and is only useful if your goal is to build a nuclear bomb? Nobody objects to the Iranians being able to build, you know, medical isotopes. The objection is these enrichment facilities that are only useful for building a nuclear weapon.
Yep.
Even some international organizations that usually don't agree with the United States were very clear that Iran's only purpose in building these underground, highly enriched facilities was to build a nuclear weapon. It just doesn't pass the smell test for you to say that you want enrichment for like medical isotopes while at the same time trying to build the facility 70, 80 feet underground.
And also don't forget, and this was part of the deal with the Iranian nuclear deal that Donald Trump, in my opinion, rightly pulled us out of, is that Iran really wasn't agreeing to inspections. They could only inspect when they said that an inspection could happen. They were not willing to give the inspectors any access and no surprise inspections. And they were in charge of where the inspectors could go. So it is obvious, and that was Donald Trump's big, and a lot of other conservatives too, where they were saying, you cannot trust Iran not to produce nuclear weapons, because what does Iran do? They perpetually lie. Jonathan Fahey is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. Jonathan, always great to have you on. Former acting director of ICE under Donald Trump in the first administration. Jonathan, always great to have you on. A couple of things. Number one, and I started out the radio program this morning, Jonathan, talking about this, and you would certainly know about this, but the headline is Iranian sleeper cells, according to the Daily Mail. Iranian sleeper cells have been activated now inside of America. Homeland Security is saying that the signal was sent from Tehran. So, I don't know. Let's talk about that. How worried are you?
I'm concerned, and more so than just sleeper cells, just so many people that came across that might share the ideology of the Iranian regime came across the border during the Biden administration that we don't even know about it. Like, we always talk about the people on the terror watch list that were caught, and I think 99 were let into the country. But that's probably not even close to our biggest concern. It's the people that came in, the 2 million plus gotaways or so that came in. Well, yeah, it's a major concern, and we had total chaos. And we talked about this, during the Biden administration all the time, that this is going to lead to bad things because we don't know who's coming in, and the Biden administration just didn't care. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of people that share the ideology. I think a lot of people, with what happened in Texas, I think there's a big vulnerability to things like that happening. And the worst thing about it is, like all of these things, when it could have been prevented, and the Biden administration didn't even try to prevent it because they were more interested in the electoral benefit they were getting from it.
Yeah, one of the things, and you talk about, and I was talking about this earlier, but, and maybe you can give me some insight into this. We got all these people that are saying, we got to be careful that we don't just knee-jerk call this a terror attack. Well, the guy was wearing a Property of Allah sweatshirt, Iranian T-shirt underneath, had photos of Iranian leaders at his home, Iranian flag inside of his home as well, had a Quran in the car, and he's from Senegal, which is West Africa. But I do find it interesting that there's still some people out there that are like, we can't knee-jerk call this a terrorist attack. I mean, why are they so worried about designating this, whether or not they should designate it as a terror attack? I mean, it seems clear to me anyway that it is. What am I missing here?
Yeah, it's really funny. Like, we would talk about, during a trial, when you're making an argument, when you're trying to prove intent by inferences you draw from the facts, you would say people don't wear shirts saying what their intent is. Well, this guy did, and it's so obvious. And I think it's really the left wing of this country. It's the left wing media because, they associate that as sort of coming from the left, so they never want to ever acknowledge there's anything bad about it, anything bad about immigration. So they're always trying to, so they'll immediately go down the road when it's a terrorist attack or something like this. It becomes a mental health issue. Remember the last name was Hassan, the guy that killed the people at Fort Hood. It was probably 10 to 15 years ago. That becomes like a mental health issue. No one wanted to call it a terrorist attack because they also don't want to acknowledge the problem, and that would, make us maybe vet people more carefully coming through and other types of things. Yeah, what would be the scenario that it's anything else? I mean, it's utterly insane, and it's not that complicated to figure anything else out. And the media, this idea they can't draw conclusions from reasonable inferences, it's like, it's a terrorist attack. I mean, maybe 1 in a trillion that they're wrong and it was something else and he just happened to be wearing the shirt the day he shot a bunch of people. But I mean, you have to be able to use common sense and talk about things in a serious way.
Yeah, and this guy, it's interesting when you look at his history. He comes into America, year 2000, naturalized citizen in 2013. He moved around a lot. They can't find where this guy, the Texas shooter, they can't find where he was employed, like anywhere. I mean, there's no work history there after coming to America in the year 2000. So he comes in under Clinton. They say naturalized under Obama, applied for asylum in 2016. Not sure where that went. But, here's the thing, is he had been arrested multiple times and he has a history of mental illness. And so I guess part of my frustration would be, why do we let people like this in? I not let them in, although I would ask that question too, but why do we let them stay when he's got all of these crimes? 3 of them are sealed, by the way, and a history of mental illness as well. What is preventing somebody somewhere in the mechanism of our government to look at this guy and say, no, this is not somebody who should be a naturalized citizen?
Yeah, it's really insane. And, Stephen Miller talks about this a lot. When you're bringing in immigrants that are, what are they, a public charge or whatever, that they basically drain the resources, putting aside the crimes, which are obviously the worst part. But it really is crazy that the criteria for bringing people in and letting them stay isn't significantly higher. I mean, we talk about the Somali issue a lot, and it's like 85% of that community is on welfare, even after a substantial period of time here. And it's sort of like it really begs the question, like, what are we doing? Is our purpose of our immigration system, even putting aside the politics of it, it seems to be in many respects just to benefit the illegal aliens and clearly at the detriment of the United States citizens that have to pay for all of this because it's expensive. We have our own problems, so importing more problems into the country, it really just defies common sense. No one would rationally do what our country has done over the last 20 or 30 years with respect to immigration.
Jonathan Fahey is joining us on Super Talk 99.7. All right, so let's zoom out and give me your opinion on this military strike. We, of course, I haven't spoken to you since the weekend when all of this started to unfold. So what do you think? Just give me your first blush on President Trump trying to take out Iran's nuclear facilities.
I think that part of it is good. And I think, we see a lot of these parallels between North Korea and Iran, like if somebody had done something about North Korea 30 or however many years ago, they would be in a different position than they are now, and our position dealing with them would be a lot different. So I think it's a good thing to do so. I think Iran can't be trusted in negotiation. And I think Donald Trump, he's someone that likes to make deals and agreements, but when he doesn't think somebody's acting in bad faith, you don't want to be on the other side of that. I mean, I have the same concern I think everyone is having. Will this become Iraq 2.0 or Vietnam or Afghanistan, where 20 years from now we're still there trying to prop up some government or have elections and stuff like that aren't in the interest of the country? So my hope is it's short, we're done. Whoever ends up being in charge will be more likely to work with us. And I think that will be true. I think most likely whoever's in charge will be more likely to work with us. But, I think I have a lot of the concerns everyone else has that, it always starts off really well with all of these things, right? And then how does it end? And that's always the question. And that's the one thing it seems like our country has never figured out how to sort of extract ourselves from these things in a positive way. Yeah,
it is interesting because J.D. Vance is out there and Donald Trump said yesterday it's not about regime change, yet we killed their leader and 49 of his henchmen as well. I think that there's a lot of nuance to this conversation. I can on the one hand cheerlead this military effort, but at the same time, and I'll tell you what I've told other folks yesterday, Jonathan, you'll love this as somebody who's been on television, Fox News, and so forth. Yesterday, I was called not only a pacifist but also a warmonger. So. And I don't exactly know how that works, but I can celebrate, the very decisive military victories that we are experiencing right now and watching all of this play out. And I love the fact, that we are going after their military and their nuclear capabilities. But now Donald Trump giving a interview to the New York Post, and he's not necessarily opposed to boots on the ground. And there's a lot of, I've got a lot of causes and pauses for concern. There are other things going on in our country. I want to talk about this headline, and then I'm going to let you fill in the blanks. Headline, illegal alien with more than 30 prior arrests fatally stabs a woman at a Virginia bus stop. ICE, of course, requesting Virginia authorities not to release this public safety threat. So, I mean, this just, it's just on the surface, it sounds horrifying, and I have a feeling I'm going to be even more horrified when I hear the story.
Yeah, this is insane. This happened this is basically the Charlotte murder with an illegal alien and even with a worse prosecutor dealing with this guy in the past. Yeah, he has 30 arrests, and the worst thing about it is I think it's at least 30 arrests or 40 total charges, but many of the charges were similar types of offenses. They were malicious wounding, which is in Virginia basically a really, really bad assault where somebody gets injured, rape, things like that. And he had multiple charges up until I think the most recent one was December of 2025, and he was routinely having his charges dropped by, we have a progressive prosecutor in Fairfax County, Virginia, funded by George Soros, who basically he's an anti-police, pro-criminal prosecutor. And one of the things he does, which makes this really, really bad, his office takes immigration status into prosecutorial decisions, meaning what plea offers. So they'll give more lenient pleas to illegal aliens than they do to American citizens so that the illegal alien doesn't get deported. So you have this guy with this history of everything gets dropped, and the prosecutor now claims they could never find the witnesses time after time after time, which, is hard to believe that would happen so many times, the witnesses on the previous case, so he had to drop them. But the point is, we have a woman dead. She was 41 years old, gets stabbed to death at a bus stop, and it's something, again, this world, like we were just talking about, the Austin case, it's like, these things are preventable, and they're so much worse, like Lake and Riley and this, when we have a government that not only didn't prevent it, but didn't even try. And that's what we have here in Fairfax County, and it's so shameful. And listen to this, we have a governor Abigail Spanberger, that just revoked, Governor Glenn Youngkin had a order saying every locality had to cooperate with ICE on detainers. She immediately revoked that, and then when specifically asked about this case, when this guy gets out, she still fell back on this. We will only do it with a judicial warrant, knowing that there's no judicial warrant available to have him deported. So even with something this bad, they still won't agree to turn him over to ICE, presuming he somehow doesn't get convicted, which in this county, in Fairfax County, there's a good chance he won't get convicted, or will have an insanity defense or something else, because we have such a lenient and also incompetent prosecutor. So it's sort of the combination of every Democratic bad policy in one, and we have a 41-year-old woman that should be alive today, but she's not because of it.
Well, and Abdul Jalloh, is that his name? Jalloh, been in this country since 2012. And, some of these, his criminal history includes more than 30 arrests for charges of rape, malicious wounding, assault, drug possession, and it goes on and on. Yet his mugshot, Jonathan Fahey, it's like he's smiling or smirking at the camera. Like, this kind of stuff is horrifying.
It's insane, and it's like, why? And when all these Democrats are fighting every deportation tooth and nail, they know they're doing so at the detriment of the American people, and they know there's some other woman out there that's going to be killed that could be prevented. We don't obviously know who it is, but we know they're preventable crimes, and the Democrats, always put politics first when it comes to immigration issue, because they see it as their ultimate pathway to electoral success. And they don't care, and that's the most horrible thing about it. It would be nice to see our governor of our state at least get out there and say something sympathetic or something, but instead it's just hard line on the open borders. We're not deporting anyone.
Knowing what you know, as we wrap this up, Jonathan Fahey is joining us. Knowing what you know as we wrap this up, you got the polling, supposedly the American people against what is happening in Iran. Do you suspect that the polling is being manipulated, which is kind of where I'm at? Or do you think that the American people are just sort of waiting to see how this whole thing plays out before coming with a final judgment as we talk about Iran?
Yeah, I don't think the polling matters at all. I think it's the final judgment that matters, because we've seen it with both Iraq wars, start off with, I think first Bush, 90% or so approval, second Bush, same thing after 9/11. So I think it's how it pans out. And I think one real quick thing on when you said Donald Trump talking about boots on the ground, I think one thing Donald Trump does and does well, he kind of, at least whatever he's thinking, he's not always sharing it on these types of things. So he wants the Iranians and the people in charge there to think, hey, we could be invaded. So that might also bring them to their senses first. I think he's learned from Iraq. J.D. Vance has learned from Iraq. I don't think we're going to be doing that. But, obviously I'm not in the know, but that's my gut take on it.
All right, we'll see what happens. And Jonathan Fahey, always great to have you on Super Talk 99.7.